Good morning. I wanted to talk to you for just a moment about a quote from Bessel van der Kolk that I quote to my clients all the time, and I think it really does capture the day-to-day experience for trauma sufferers. Now, hold on a second. You hear the word trauma, and you think of a past event, and you think of a very standard list of past events: loss of a loved one, car accident, natural disaster, going off to war, etc. But that's an antiquated 20th century understanding of trauma. A 21st century understanding of trauma would tell us that trauma is really a state of overwhelm in the nervous system. And you can experience that state of overwhelm in the nervous system due to virtually unlimited situations. But even for a lot of people, it's not a singular situation that causes that state of nervous system overwhelm, which would be called a major trauma. It's like a lightning strike. There's also something called complex trauma, where it's actually repeated stress and adversity over time that leads to the overwhelm in the nervous system. But regardless, once you hit that point of overwhelm, there are certain symptoms that start to show up that don't show up until the point of overwhelm, such as time can feel distorted, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex starts to shut down, memory starts to get thrown off. Your memory goes from registering as explicit narrative-based memory to implicit procedural memory. So you could see your memory as like a plate. It just kind of shatters into 1,000 pieces, and you might just remember bits and pieces of things. You might start to have huge gaps in memory. Also depersonalization, feeling detached from your body. Your body and soul kind of feel separated. You might feel that detachment in your hands. You might feel it isolated, behind your eyes. You feel like you're kind of a little behind your body. You might feel it isolated to your legs. You might feel just totally disconnected from your body. And then, of course, derealization, wherever all of a sudden everything feels like it's not real. You feel like you're watching a movie. Some people describe it as a wall of glass between them and reality. You just don't have that emotional connection to life. But not just that, you literally feel like you're living in really a different universe compared to what you used to experience. These symptoms show up because your nervous system thinks that you're dying. Your nervous system thinks that you're about to be eaten by a lion, and it's trying to help you. It's trying to mitigate, to reduce the pain of being eaten by a lion. And yet, people don't know that. They don't understand why these symptoms are happening. And so, just like me, whenever they showed up initially during a bad panic attack from a marijuana experience, they get really stressed out. And that's why education is paramount. And every single video that I do, I try to give a little bit of education about what's going on. Because if you don't have the right neuroscience of what's going on, your catastrophic anxious brain is going to fill in the blanks with all these terrible things. My brain's broken. I've got, this thing and that thing and that thing, and especially the fear of permanence. And so with that being said, if you're experiencing depersonalization, realization, or any of those other symptoms, you need to know that it's simply a sign that your body is a war zone. And for a lot of people, especially if these symptoms are ongoing, you're probably going to look back at your history and realize, like, you know what, this has probably been a long time coming. But I'll also say that you probably haven't realized how stressed out that you've been for a number of different reasons. I always quote this study that was done. Joseph Ledoux mentions this. He's a neuroscientist that specializes in fear and threat detection. But these scientists or the people conducting the study, I don't necessarily know if they were scientists, but they subliminally flashed a picture of a snake and a spider on a screen to people who were sitting obviously in front of the screens. And these are original triggers. This isn't a conditioned stimulus or anything, meaning that all human beings associate a snake or a spider with threat. And subliminally, meaning it was faster than they could see. And then they asked them, do you feel any different? They said no. And then they asked them, did you see anything on the screen? And they said no. And then they checked and they had them hooked up to blood pressure monitor, oximeter. They were mapping what was happening in their brain. Their body was going into fight or flight response. Blood pressure increased, breathing rate elevated, the amygdala was firing. So they were activated without conscious awareness. And Joseph Ledoux says that fear is actually not an emotion. It is whenever you consciously become aware that your body is in fight or flight response and you have a sense of danger. And so a lot of people walk around with a lot more stress than they realize because fear hasn't kicked in. And they think that the moment that fear kicks in is whenever all of this started and that this came out of nowhere, whenever in reality, they probably had been carrying a lot of stress that they didn't realize. And then you take the factor of we live in our heads. We also do things to numb our body, whether it's nicotine or alcohol or drugs or this thing or that thing. A lot of people are not aware at how much that their body is a war zone. Okay. And so anyway, let me read this quote. It's by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and it's in the book, The Body Keeps a Score, which is an amazing book. Skip the first chapter if you're going to buy that, by the way. The first chapter, he talks about his history and I think like a VA hospital, and it's very triggering for people. And don't expect that book to tell you how to like fix this, by the way. He does recommend like trauma-informed yoga, which I recommend to my clients as well. It's very, very powerful for kind of gently coming back into the body, befriending it. But it's more information, which is great. He's done a wonderful job at taking understanding that is very complex and kind of breaking it down in a way that's palatable for the everyday person like you and me. And so, wonderful book. Anyway, he says traumatized people chronically feel unsafe inside their bodies. And remember, trauma is a state of overwhelming stress. I have people ask me all the time, they're like, you're telling me DPDR comes from trauma, but I haven't been through a car accident. I haven't lost a loved one recently. I haven't gone to war. Again, that's because you're thinking of trauma as a past event in a very specific list of events. That is an antiquated understanding. And that's what I used to have too. It's a state. But he says the past is alive in the form of gnawing interior discomfort. That's interesting. He says the past is alive in the form of interior discomfort here in the here and now. And see, that's what we need to shift when it comes to our understanding of trauma. Again, going back to this belief that trauma is about what happened in the past. Trauma is not a past event. It is a present perception of threat in the here and now, and your body preparing to address a perceived threat in the here and now in the form of fight, flight, freeze response in the body. And for it to be trauma, it needs to be at least the freeze response, meaning that you've reached that point of overwhelm. Otherwise, it's not that it's not severe, but it would be more like anxiety, right? Which I walked around with for 15 years. That's horrible and debilitating. And a lot of people that are in a trauma state, I would even say most that I work with, are also in an anxious state, but they're also experiencing trauma symptoms like emotional numbness, depersonalization-derealization, time feeling distorted, memory issues, things like that. Symptoms that show up only at the point of overwhelm in the nervous system. Now, I will say in the deepest state of trauma, there's no anxiety. You're just completely numb and dissociated. But anyway, most people that I work with that are in a trauma state, there's some anxiety symptoms and there's some trauma symptoms. But anyway, with that being said, once we understand that that's what trauma is, I always define it as that trauma is a body that is constantly preparing for a threat that never comes. It also makes the way out of trauma self-apparent. If that is correct, that trauma is a body that is constantly preparing for a threat that never comes, well, then the way out of it is to do things that communicate safety to the nervous system. And that's what I do with my clients. We don't focus on anything other than things that are specifically designed to communicate safety to the nervous system. And the research that we use to support the approach that I use in my program has identified 4 primary ways that happens. Number one, in fact, there was a meta-analysis that looked at all the evidence-based methodologies for healing trauma, CBT, EMDR, talk therapy, a number of others. And there was literally less than 1%, there was less than a 1% variance in outcome based upon which of those evidence-based practices was used. What? And then on that study, which was replicated, by the way, so this wasn't some rogue one-off study, it literally says there was, quote, no discernible difference in outcome based upon which method was used. What? I mean, that sent shockwaves through the mental health world, because you had people that were like, okay, EMDR is where it's at. Oh, no, it's all about CBT. It's all about talking. And that study, which again was replicated, just completely destroyed that belief that there was some superior methodology. And so there was research done that asked the question, well, if it's not the particulars of that evidence-based approach that is producing the results, then what is producing the results? And there were 4 things that were found. And this is what I build my entire program around, and that's why it's effective. Number 1 is self-regulation. This is directly calming the body. Remember, if trauma is a body that is constantly preparing for a threat that never comes, we need to do things that show the body that there's no threat. And whenever you directly start to relax the body, as well as release adrenaline, which is done either through inducing the tremor mechanism or just fast motion exercises, is what I teach my clients too, as well as emotion, facing your emotions. See, emotions are experienced in the form of physical sensations in the body. And that's one reason why your body gets overwhelmed and it triggers DPDR, is because you've been stuffing down your emotions. And I don't say that to bring shame. I used to do the same thing. But you're just adding a layer of negative physical sensations to your body, and eventually it's like a pressure cooker. You stuff your emotions down over and over and over again, especially if you're not relaxing your body, and especially if you've got adrenaline constantly going through your bloodstream, your body becomes a pressure cooker. In DPDR, if you're experiencing that, which I'm mentioning that a lot because obviously most of you are here because you know I talk a lot about DPDR, and there's not enough help for that. DPDR, you could also say, is like a circuit breaker. All right, think about in your house, right? There's too much power in the electrical system, and the circuit breaker kicks on to temporarily disconnect your appliances from the circuit or from the electrical system to prevent burnout and overwhelm. DPDR are basically your brain telling your body is overwhelmed. Your nervous system is overwhelmed, right? And just like with a circuit breaker, once we stabilize the power, like that's what we need to be focusing on, which is representative of get the body in a much better shape. We will indirectly restore connection in terms of feeling connected to your body, your personality, your surroundings, feeling like your normal self. Everything will be reversed, right? But the mistake that people make is that, just like I did whenever I was suffering, is they get lured away by the symptoms because they're so terrifying and debilitating, and we use deductive reasoning and think, oh, well, they must be the problem. But anyway, again, number 1, self-regulation, directly releasing the tension, adrenaline, and emotion from the body, as well as making lifestyle adjustments to make sure that you're not driving your body into the ground, listening to your body. Sometimes you got to walk away from some relationships or make some adjustments at work. You really do have to create a lifestyle that facilitates rest and relaxation of the body. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be working and burning energy and things like that, but you can't just, like, you're not a machine. Like, you have to be careful, right? The second thing is co-regulation. This is this understanding that people heal people. This is 45% of healing, actually. And people have a hard time with that, even people that come into my program, because it's not objective, it's subjective, right? With, self-regulation skills, right? That's very tangible. That's, even quantifiable. But with co-regulation, it's cues of safety that are being sent by working with somebody that can build hope in you and build a secure attachment relationship with you. And it's more about, positive facial expressions, a calm vocal tonality, positive body language. It's also one thing that I do a lot is I'm very particular with what I say. I make sure that I don't say things that are triggering. And even in my program, like we have a lot of boundaries set in place to where we make sure that we're not, obsessing over the symptoms and everybody's just showing up talking about how painful their life is and things like that. And I'm also, I always phrase things in such a way that it builds hope and, and I made some mistakes early on in my career, like the first year especially, which I've been doing this, I think about, I just passed 7 years, but I said a couple things the wrong way, and it set a couple of my clients like into like a lot of stress, and I was like, oh crap. And so and I also used to speak like really loud. I don't know why. I'm formally trained as a pastor, and maybe that's where it came from. I listened to a lot of preachers that just kind of almost yelled their sermons or whatever. So maybe it's like natural for me to talk louder, but I have to be careful and kind of try to talk softer. Even to this day, I have to work on that. But all that I'm saying is it's really about co-regulation. It's really a mammalian pursuit whenever our brain perceives threat. It's something that we look to calm ourselves down. Mammals heal mammals, people heal people, right? So for example, even like elephants, like if they have some sort of, conflict with another, mammal or predator or whatever, once the threat passes, they'll kind of like slap their trunks together. Other animals will kind of groom each other, like clean each other. They really do comfort one another. And this is one reason why non-human mammals don't stay stuck in fight, flight, freeze response. And we oftentimes do, is because they instinctually do things that communicate enough safety to the nervous system where it can calm down. And all mammals have the same basic nervous system too. So we have a lot to learn from non-human mammals. But anyway, co-regulation, it's basically just this understanding that we are wired to heal each other. And I can tell you story after story from my own personal life of people who have come into my life during hardship. And sometimes they didn't even have to say anything. Just being there for me. Just a calm presence. Just, most communication is nonverbal. So let's say you're going through a really tough time. Let's say that you and I are in the same room and I'm like, oh man, right? Do you see how it's not even that I'm saying all the right stuff? It's that I'm communicating safety in the form of relationship and connection, right? And I can't tell you how many people that, they'll start talking to me and they've spent years, trying to find somebody that understands them and they can validate their experience. And, the very first conversation that we have, they just start crying their eyes out. And I always tell them, I'm like, let it out, because they finally feel enough sense of safety to where they can really, really process their emotions. And we all want to be validated. And, whether it's me or somebody else, you need somebody in your life that can really build hope in you and just have that secure attachment relationship where you feel safe to process and to learn how to self-regulate. It's also been said that co-regulation precedes self-regulation. You could see co-regulation as like training wheels on a bicycle. Self-regulation, getting all that buildup out of your body, that's like it's like riding the bike. And then co-regulation is really just that support as you're learning how to self-regulate. And what I tell the people that work with me is like, my goal is to get you to not need me as quickly as possible, right? But as you're learning to get back into your body and self-regulate, it is very, very difficult. Why is it difficult? Because people have been living in their heads for a long time. I tell people all the time, like, I lived most of my life and wasn't even aware that I had a body. I was just like a brain floating around. And whenever I started to get back into my body, which, by the way, progressive muscle relaxation as well as trauma-informed yoga are both really great, gentle ways to get you back experiencing your embodied self, which is called interoception. Dr. Peter Levine calls it the felt sense. You also may call it bodyfulness, right? You've heard of mindfulness, so bodyfulness. experiencing your embodied self in real time is very, very important. Because remember, going back to what we're talking about, trauma is a body that is constantly preparing for a threat that never comes in the here and now. But anyway, that journey of getting back into your body, like it's not easy, because there are very strong patterns of dissociation, which means to separate, right? And you're a good person with a painful history, so I don't say this to bring any shame, but you've learned to live perpetually disembodied, because to experience your embodied self is like Bessel van der Kolk is talking about, is going to lead to a lot of discomfort. And so your life has become really one big attempt to stay out of your body. That's where we get into social media addiction. That's where we get into constantly watching Netflix. That's where we get into daydreaming. That's where we get into obsessing over the past or the future. Even health anxiety or existential obsession rumination can sometimes be a way to perpetually stay in your head. You live in your head all day, just like I used to. And then also, of course, there's a lot of things that we do to directly numb our body. Nicotine, alcohol, just drugs, the list goes on. And typically we tend to see that as bad behavior, which just fuels shame, which only further perpetuates the addiction cycle, instead of seeing it as good people who are hurting and want to feel better. That's why Gabor Mate, I love what he says. He's a physician. He says, and he specializes in addiction. And he says, instead of asking people why the addiction, why don't we start asking them why the pain, right? The addiction is a symptom of the pain. It's an attempt to make the pain go away. But with that being said, the process of getting back in your body and experiencing your embodied self and getting rid of all that buildup of tension, adrenaline, and emotion, it's very challenging. It's very challenging. And it's like, think of like a hoarder's house, if you've ever seen that show Hoarders on TLC. And, they basically walk into the house and you can't even walk through it. It's just absolutely full of trash and junk. That's basically how your body is whenever you first get back in tune with it after you've been kind of mentally checked out for years. Like it's hard. And so anyway, so co-regulation comes in to basically give hope and support as you're going through that process. So whether you're working with somebody locally, or you find somebody else, or you end up applying to work with me, those two things that we just talked about are super important. You need a body-based strategy. There's a lot of buildup in the body. In fact, that is why depersonalization-derealization are there, is because of overwhelming buildup of stress, tension, emotion in the body. But then again, having that calming voice and that secure relationship to guide you as you're learning how to do that, super duper important. The third thing is exposure, right? Facing particularly your sensory triggers, okay? You've learned to find relief through avoidance. Yes, you're avoiding your body, but you're also probably avoiding a lot around you. Some people don't do that. Some people, they're just avoiding their body. I always say you're physically present, but you're interoceptively absent, meaning that you're there, but you're not in your body, you're in your head. But regardless, a lot of people start avoiding anything that triggers symptoms. And I get it, you just want to feel better, but the problem with that is it starts to just communicate that you're in danger. Whatever you run from or whatever you avoid, your brain assumes is a lion trying to eat you. And so one of the things that you can do to communicate safety to your nervous system is start to face those triggers that you're avoiding, and also start to calm your body while you're doing that, because that doubles the signals of safety that are being sent to the nervous system. That's one thing that I do with my clients. The equation is exposure plus relaxation equals desensitization, okay? And then the last thing is, the fourth primary thing that communicates safety to the body is getting the right information and renewing your mind to that. Believe it or not, getting the right neuroscience. Because if you don't have the right neuroscience, your brain is going to fill in the blanks with all kinds of catastrophic outcomes. The belief you're going crazy, your symptoms are permanent, you're the exception to being able to recover, all these things. It's a beautiful thing to see people's fears melt away whenever they start to understand that they're simply in the right state at the wrong time. Their symptoms are biologically correct for the state of their nervous system. oh, that's my memory is off because my memory is fragmented because I'm in a trauma state and it's registering as implicit procedural memory instead of explicit narrative based memory. Oh, okay. Oh, so I'm not going crazy. Oh, time feels distorted because the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is shut down. Okay, that makes so. The reason why my eyes are light sensitive is because my body is in fight or flight, and my pupils are dilated. I'm letting in a lot more of my surroundings. Oh, that makes sense. And then also, the eye floaters. It turns out that everybody has eye floaters, but whenever you've got a lot of light coming into your eyes because your pupils are dilated, you can simply see them. Oh my God. So I remember I used to sit and look at those eye floaters. I thought I was going nuts. And a big part of what I do with my clients, and I want you to go through this process. And by the way, that book, The Body Keeps a Score, is a great resource. I've got my 5 Shifts Masterclass link below as well. It goes really deep into the neuroscience. Just watch my videos. I try to talk about this every video too. That's really important. And then you go through this process. It's technically called cognitive restructuring, where you start to renew your mind to the truth about how safe your symptoms are and how they're biologically correct. So those are the 4 primary things. There's a lot of individual factors that I address with people, but those are the things. We're going to finish the quote. I actually got a meeting I got to get to. He says, their bodies are constantly bombarded by visceral warning signs. And in an attempt to control these processes, they often become expert at ignoring their gut feelings and in numbing awareness of what is played out inside. They learn to hide from themselves. Traumatized people chronically feel unsafe inside their bodies. And so, think about it. The body keeps the score, right? The trauma is what's left over from these painful past experiences. It's about what's happening in the here and now. You're experiencing sensory data that is similar to painful past experiences, and it's causing your body to go into fight, flight, freeze response in the here and now. And so that's why we don't need to be focusing on the symptoms. Not that there's anything wrong with trying to invite them in or acceptance or whatever. I'm not against that. But if we don't directly get your body out of fight, flight, freeze response by doing those 4 things, the best that you're going to get is symptom management in the long term. And that's not what we want, okay? So anyway, I hope that this has helped you. I love that quote. I read it all the time. And make sure to check out, Bessel van der Kolk's resources. He's awesome. Anyway, click like if this helped you, and comment something below. Subscribe, join this channel if you're struggling with depersonalization, realization, anxiety, panic attacks, OCD, anything like that. I'd be happy to encourage you. And I got to go. I'll talk to you real soon. Have a good day.